Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start. I'm actually in the middle of a lab with my biochemistry of food class, but this is a particularly well-timed interlude because I've just knocked out the sugar receptors in their mouths with an Indian herb called Gymnema sylvestre. So they're in the middle of a little experiment. And this will give their tongues a chance to recover before the next part. This is an interesting talk for me because I've never had an opportunity to talk in any kind of formal setting before about what is a large part of my life, a large part of what I see as my creative endeavor, and that is art. Music, art, the creative side of my life outside of science. And I say outside of science because for much of my life, at least before coming to Colby, that part of my life had to live fairly outside of the sort of conventional academic path that I was walking. And I think that is a function of a couple things. It's a function of the fact that I wasn't as lucky as you guys to go to a small liberal arts college in New England where that kind of integration is valued. And I think it's also a function of the era that I came from, where it was a much more radical idea to be a person that had these multiple hats. It's often made me feel sometimes a little schizophrenic trying to be a person that has these two parts to my life, often told that they're conflicting. Society tells you that they're conflicting, but I've always saw them as being both my love of science and my love of art and creative production as coming from the same place in me. I've never seen them as like two sides of myself. They're just different ways. The same curiosity about life and the world around me manifests itself. So I'm starting with this picture because I actually think these are high schoolers that I teach over at Snow Pond. That there's a charter high school in Sydney that I teach some classes at just because they need it and it's fun. But I must have been talking about the philosophy of science or something with them. And on the test, I get them to write haikus. I've done that to some of you students before as well, I think. But I really loved this one. I have always loved the completeness of science. Turns out they were wrong. It was a pretty beautiful one to me. Well, for me, science kind of came before art. I didn't think of myself as an artist for a long part of my life, even though I was making things. But that creative impulse, the drive to put things together started with science. And actually, this exact science kit, I got that kit right there when I was that tall. And I just started learning about electricity and light bulbs and switches and basic circuits. And I really fell in love with Thomas Jefferson Thomas Edison. I like Thomas Jefferson too. Thomas Edison and his invention of the light bulb and like seeing, they're pretty commonplace now, but those Edison light bulbs back then, I remember seeing one when I went to visit the museum, and I was like, that is so magical. It just felt like such a magical thing to me. I started gutting this kit, and I would build little circuits into like a pencil box. I had these pencil boxes, and I would put, I don't have pictures of any of this stuff, but I would put magnifying glasses cut into holes in the pencil box, and there would be drawers, and there was a light inside and switches that could control the intensity and a little readout that would tell me how. It was like a microscope. I was trying to make a microscope out of a pencil box, but retrospectively, I wish I still had it because it was such a magical world that I would get drawn into by looking through the lenses and playing with light and looking close at things. So it really just started with me playing with science. And then I became a teenager and later, and music took over my life. I just fell in love with punk rock. I was in zillions of bands all over the place in Detroit and in Ann Arbor. Many bands. This band Bullweevil, a band called Scheme, Hermaphrodite. I don't even know what this band was called. We only played that one time. In a bunch of different places. And music was another, it seemed like an imperative for me, some way to just like create and explore. And that world had to live in the darkness from the like 23 credits of biochemistry that I would carry at Eastern Michigan when I was going to school there as an undergrad. I just worked hard. I got good grades. And I was really disciplined in my schoolwork. I felt fortunate to be in school, but I couldn't stop myself from, I wasn't interested in going to like frat parties or like parties in general. I didn't drink. I wasn't interested in alcohol. I didn't drink anything until I was 21. I was just in bands. So that was what drove me. And I came in contact, not with this exact copy. I sadly don't have a picture of the actual CRC Handbook that I still have. But this was the edition, the 73rd edition. I got drawn to it because 73 was the year I was born. And I took the book and I completely wrapped it in duct tape and built all this stuff around it and then called it the Book of Mystery. And I essentially, I don't know if you've ever looked through a CRC handbook. The old ones are so beautiful. The old ones are really beautiful if you can get an old copy. They're lovely books. The new ones aren't as exciting. But I use them as sketchbooks. And I would just, on the pages, draw. Because I liked the feel of the paper. It took the pen well. And sometimes, like this was a symbol I drew based on somebody's birthday for them. And I have literally thousands of drawings in this book. I mean, the book's that thick. I would color. I'd be on the road. This was when I was in a band. We were driving down the road, like long trips, just sketching stuff. Pictures of people I would meet along the way. What does this have to do with science? Not a whole lot. This here. But it was in the CRC handbook, and like science was never too far from my experience. It was always somewhere on the periphery of my art somehow. Then I would often take these drawings, and so you can see here some of the little chemical symbols on the page. These are quite large. Each of these panels is about this big. And I got to the point where I wasn't really interested in printing on paper. I liked the translucence of the silkscreen, and the silkscreen process is a really fun process. There's a lot of interesting chemistry in the photo emulsion that you use to burn these screens. And I started falling in love with the screens themselves, and I began to think about, printmaking and the source of your printmaking, like where's the actual art? Is it in the print? Is it in the source? And so the screen to me at this stage was the art. And so I started building these things. These light up, actually. There's lights behind them. Because another one of I always like to light things up. I was building light boxes from a very young age. And one of the idea for me was, I still didn't call myself an artist here. I didn't think about it like that. I just was driven to do it. You have an apartment. We live downtown. There's a lot of students that live down there with us. And, you want to make your apartment cool at night. And then why be subject to the lighting that's in a space. I liked pieces of art that lit up and set the mood in a space. And I had more control over how my art was viewed when the art supplied the lighting itself, as opposed to being subject to the lighting constraints of wherever the art is being situated. It's just fun to look at art lit up at night. So eventually, I moved on to University of Virginia and in Charlottesville to graduate school. And I started doing some work. These are some drawings, that some source material. Some of it's my drawing, some of it is source material. There's like an image. These lines here are from Da Vinci, actually. But again, they're just light boxes. I was in love with light and the translucence of the screens. These were the actual screens, and then I would screen onto glass and lay the glass over the screen. This I included it because I don't have a lot of pictures of my art. If there's anyone out there that is making art or thinking about art, one of the things I can really strongly encourage you to do is to document what you did. I didn't. Like huge chunks of my life, huge amounts of work that I have done, I just didn't document because I didn't care to. It wasn't easy back then with a digital click. It was like film or whatever. So document what you do. I didn't. This is the only piece I have from a large body that I made centered around a friend of mine who died. It was made from pieces that were collected from his room after he took his own life. But one of the reasons I put it here is that there's still this like translucence. It's like it's made out of these pieces of glass, and then the images are below it, and it's hard to see it. You have to get really close to be able to make anything out under the glass. So eventually I couldn't handle being in graduate school at UVA. I just didn't like the demeanor of the college there and the people I had to work with, which is another thing. If I can give you some pearls instead of just talking about myself. Every step you make in your life, I think one of the most important things about that step is the people you surround yourself with. Who are you going to work with? Who are the people you're choosing to build with? That's so important. I find it important. And I wish I had known that. I wish somebody had impressed upon me the importance of that in graduate school, in career later on. I would have made different choices. I would have made better choices maybe. I don't know. I'm here. I'm happy about being here. But I moved from University of Virginia to Notre Dame. And my dad went to Notre Dame, so my family, I didn't go there because of that. But there's this hilarious picture I have from when I was a little boy, and I'm in my grandparents' house sitting next to this doll that I have no memory of, wearing a Notre Dame t-shirt with that hairdo there. But then at Notre Dame, I met my lovely wife, Denise, who kind of has the same hairdo in this picture as that doll, which is a weird thing to me. All right. So when I was in South Bend, by this point, I had decided I was an artist. It was at this transition where I didn't like the guy I was working for in Charlottesville. And I was like, you know what? The art that I was doing was taking over. I was working at night. I didn't tell that story when I was showing the clarinet there, but I worked at a sushi restaurant to make money because the graduate stipend was crap. And I was doing research in the daytime, and I was making art at night. And I was really burning the candle at both ends. And at that point in my life, art was fun for me. In the bench work, while intellectually engaging, that interpersonal dynamic that I talked about as being so important, I just felt like I was in a soulless environment there. I couldn't do it. So I stopped. I dropped out. And that's when I called myself an artist, specifically when I started trying to sell my work, because I'd never sold anything before. I was always just giving it away to people around me as gifts or keeping it. Most of it's gone, though. So at this point, when I'm in South Bend, I guess I'm an artist at this point, right? And there were different ways that I would go about being creative. So here in the middle, This is glucose, my class. We talked about glucose today. This is actually glucose, but these big red and green clouds, those are electron clouds around glucose. I studied nuclear spin dynamics in glucose and ways of measuring structural parameters in sugars. And it was a real, I loved it. It was a backwater of biochemistry. Most biochemists don't really pay carbohydrates the attention that I think they should. So I liked being in that backwater a little bit. And I was able to dive really deep into some basic physics with it. And that was a creative endeavor for me, too. And it started generating a huge amount of data. And you'll see some examples of how that became my inspiration. But I also journaled a lot. I journaled a lot, so much. I have notebooks and notebooks of journaling where I'm writing about all kinds of things. Science, often the experiments I'm doing and my thoughts about where I want the science to go. And then, but I didn't separate books based upon science and art and my personal life. I just separated, it was all chronologic. I just had it dates, the 6-digit date. And so there would be passages where I would be talking about some really esoteric biophysics of carbohydrates. And then there would be other long passages where I would be talking about a person that I saw and my reflections on a person that made a real impact on me. Or maybe, like, so in this little clip I have here, I guess I'm talking about the botanical conservatory that I worked at as well on the side. I became, one of the big outlets for me creatively at this point became this Paisley Parsley's Parcel Post, which was I started editing this community journal. And there was a ton of art that started going into that. And that was a way for me to bring science and art and all kinds of other aspects of culture and other academic erudition, always with a sort of sense of humor, blending campus and community all into one sort of grand thing that I printed by abusing my graduate printing privileges. But it was a real outlet for me. Again, had to still be under the radar of the department at Notre Dame. They were not interested in my interest in art, in my interest in music, my interest in culture. But again, the message I'm giving you, I didn't let it stop me. I didn't let it stop me. If you have something that needs to come out of you creatively, I come from the point where you got to let it out. You've got to let it out, because if you repress that thing, then I don't know. Some people, my wife, I wish I could be like her sometimes, because she's been so focused on being just so good at what she does, right? This thing that she's really excellent at. And I had all these interests that I was trying to juggle all at once. So the music never went away. Here's, again, just like a small smattering of flyers for shows. You'll see that they're all this band Squirm. I met these guys who called themselves Squirm, and I fit with them really well. So we played a ton of shows together, all kinds of places. One of them at this botanical conservatory, that ended up being a really magical space for me, a lot of reflection, and definitely a place where science and art came together. I have so many endless hours of footage of just plants. I would set the camera up. I got Notre Dame to buy me a camera because I was making them all this training footage for their organic chemistry lab. So I had this great camera, and I was setting it on plants in the botanical conservatory, and I would just get hours of footage of this plant. And then I would condense, 8 hours of a water lily into 30 seconds or something like that. And it's amazing when you do that, the life that you see in a plant. We don't see it because they move at a different time scale than the scales that we live on. And so that conservatory. It was a fertile place for me for both art and science. And then during this time, I knew people all over the place because I was a musician and I've been traveling a lot. I met these people in New York that were starting a gallery in Tribeca, and they dragged me in to their inaugural show, which was about the city of Detroit. I'm from Detroit originally, and so I did a small body of work that you see here, centered around Detroit, and all the pieces in this group. So up to this point, science has been sort of tangential, but I started actually making science the content of my work a little bit more at this point, where this isn't just science, it was more environmental justice, specifically related to things that had scientific ramifications. So for example, this one here was looking at, it's hard to see in the picture, but there's a water heater in the back. You can see Detroit. There's a lot of asbestos and lead in the old infrastructure in Detroit. And it was a real public health problem that was being ignored. And this was before Flint blew up, which is kind of related, not exactly the same as what I'm talking about here, but still an environmental justice issue for across the socioeconomic spectrum here. Some other pieces. This one was called dioxin cardiac reflux hemisection. Complicated name. It's a picture of my friend Otis that I made while I was there. He was a mentally handicapped individual who had grown up next to a dioxin Superfund site. They've been clamshell digging the Army Corps. It was a dirty, long story, but a dirty, corrupted story in East Chicago. And there was, I forget, it's like 2 orders of magnitude above the national occurrence of certain kinds of birth defects and cognitive deficits in this neighborhood of people that had grown up next to this thing. So I made a piece about him and the cardiac hemisection. So it's like half of his heart. He has a broken heart there. And the piece here is the wire sculpture. The screen didn't work so well, so I actually incorporated the wire into the piece. I sort of regret doing that now because that thing got sold and it's gone. But I do have the image, and this is the other half of it. Here's the other half of his heart. And the piece is on the left, and there's a detail on the right here. You can actually see a picture. This is the only picture I have of my friend. Lovely, lovely man. Another one here down the middle. It's a strip down the middle. It's a long, thin piece. I'm just showing a couple details on either side. This one's about the Rouge River, and it's the river that runs through the city of Detroit. It's been mostly paved over, although this project in Detroit is removing a lot of that and revealing this river that has been hidden for well over a century. That's a tributary of the Detroit River. But it has something like 250 different toxic chemicals in its waters that above EPA limits that are considered to be safe. And so in this piece, if you see, so this piece is maybe that thick, several layers of glass with silk screen in between each of the layers of glass, and then I printed a list of all of the chemicals that were in the river, and you can sort of see it running along. Along the length of the piece. So. This is another piece about an incinerator and a Rastafarian dude that I knew in Detroit. So a lot of these pictures were coming from, some of these pictures are being drawn still from the Book of Mystery. I continued to use it as a sketchbook. The thing was huge. And I often would use that as source material for some of these silk screens. So silk screen on the right. On the left, this is a detail from a piece of art that went into a CD that I made with my band Squirm. I put this thing up here because I thought it was a kind of a good metaphor for what we were talking about here. On one hand, you have, so this is the album cover, the CD cover that I designed. On one hand, you have, biology, life emerging, but I often felt kind of, cut up, mixed up with my art and my science, like trying to figure out how to put it back together into a whole person that made sense. I don't know if I'm going to show you this, but I did a lot of the boundary between art and science often would get blurred. So this is a time lapse that I filmed that I made for a friend of mine, Tim Holine, that was a colleague of my wife's. This is a time lapse film. Maybe I will show it to you, where he was looking at the effect of large woody debris on the life of a stream. And I did a lot of time lapse. I was moving into filmography. And so some of the film that I started, film work I started doing, actually was being used for science, but I loved the aesthetic aspect of it. Anybody who's done, like a Western blot or a Southern blot or any of these kinds of techniques, these molecular techniques, they're kind of beautiful. Like science is beautiful. The things that you have at your hands, your fingertips, are beautiful. And in biology in particular, it's so easy. It's so direct. It's like it's the physical world, the living physical world around you. It's easy to see that beauty. And here again, this is I guess another example of like the time scale of plants, and beyond that, the time scale of a living landscape. How to really see the way it breathes and it lives. You have to look at it and think about it on a different time scale. So there's the flood. That's where we are right now, right? That's enough of that one. Let's go back. Oh yeah, this guy. So I told you I did scalar coupling calculus. I was a theoretical biochemist or whatever, and I saw my data sets were unbelievably enormous and super abstract numbers, 6-7 dimensional hypersurfaces that I'm trying to wrap my head around and parameterize, all this kind of stuff. And so I was doing a lot of graphical representation. This is a still. This is one still that I grabbed. So one day I was just maxed out on my research, and I had all these videos of these plots, these three-dimensional hypersurfaces. And I was trying to learn some videography techniques, so I just edited this video. And it's like 9 minutes. I'm not going to play any of it for you. If you want, you can go to my Vimeo channel and look at it. But it is beautiful to me watching viewing these abstract numerical spaces from an aesthetic perspective. So this is looking at spin lattice connectivity in a two-bond carbon-carbon coupling in glucose. So yeah. Here is, so you have these molecular machinations, and I'm parameterizing them with trigonometric functions. And again, I just was in love with some of these trigonometric functions. I started shrinking the time scale. So these are all trig functions that I was using to parameterize these scalar couplings. And if you look at them at the right time scale, they're lovely. They're just gorgeous. And I started taking them and using those to burn screens. So I have a whole series of work that's lost to the winds now, based upon screens that I burned from these vellums here. Again, like lovely, lovely, lovely to me. But this is like an incredibly abstract source, right? The actual source is, some very esoteric element of a carbohydrate. The point being that beauty is everywhere. The beauty is everywhere. Don't think because somebody else doesn't see it that it's not there. It is. It is. It's not all peaches and cream, though. This was really hard to manage, right? It was very hard at Notre Dame, living truly two separate lives. And so this was another show that I did at a gallery, and I was still a full-time graduate student, kicking butt, had a bunch of papers in press, but back then I was under a lot of stress, a huge amount of stress, and it negatively affected me. You can see here I'm turning beet red. I ended up in the hospital after this, actually, because I wasn't listening to my body, listening to myself. This is, most of you know my shtick about health and really paying attention. This is where a lot of that came from. Yeah, I walked out of this show here. That piece you see there, that red, blue, and yellow one, it's based on some aperiodic tiling patterns from Roger Penrose, the physicist at Cambridge. But that whole thing just wrecked me. I ended up in the hospital after that. It was really bad. And so I focused on my graduate studies. This is a slide that I sometimes show. I've taken it out of my A&P thing because I don't know. I don't have the time to talk about hair. But I put this in here because it's, besides being a funny picture, this was the night before I had to defend my dissertation. I had been for like 8 months doing nothing but working on my computer super deep. Art was gone. The only art that I had was the hair that I was growing on the top of my head. And I was going to go to defend my dissertation. I was going to shave everything off. And my clipper couldn't handle it. It broke down mid-shave. I got stuck like that on a Sunday night before, it was in the middle of the summer, Sunday night at like 9 o'clock or whatever. I'm going to defend my dissertation like this. All the barbershops are closed. My friend had a pair. He finished me off. But so after that, I was like, I need a different trajectory in my life. We moved to New Zealand. I got a job working for a radio station, got some grants through Creative New Zealand, made a movie, did a lot of fun stuff. Then I moved to Texas with this little guy that we brought back from New Zealand. And so my art really focused on him. He became, for a long time, my children became my creative output. And then we moved to Maine, and we do things like this, build stick caves. That's art. But I still would run into people. I know I'm going over. I want to wind it up. I don't want to take all the time. But this was based on a wire sculpture that I made really quickly of a guy that I met who was literally that color. If you ever see anybody with jaundice who's in liver failure, that's the color that they are. They turn a crazy yellow, a really crazy yellow from the bilirubin that's building up in their blood. And I met him. Whoa, wow! And I asked him if I could take a picture, and he's like, So I was like, okay, let me do a sculpture of you right here. I just did some with some wire real quick to try to get it. That was one sculpture. It's just images from different aspects of the same little wire sculpture. And this is what it looks like lit up. This happened in Waterville here. This was art that I've done in Waterville. Here's another piece based upon a single, again, wire sculpture that I made of a friend of mine named Riley, who is a passive architect. And I liked the idea of passive architecture and his own personality and the interplay of all that. But these are just examples of the kind of work that I've been doing with silkscreen and wire sculpture, whatever. But art has made its way into my classroom. So again, evolving the story, I'm so fortunate to be at Colby because Colby has been a place where I don't feel like I have to hide that part. In fact, I don't care to hide it any longer. I have embraced it. I put it into my classes where I can, whenever I can. I teach at that high school. These are a group of high schoolers that I taught over there. I don't have very good pictures of any of this, but those high schoolers on the left here, this was the physics class I had. They were making oscilloscopes out of old TVs. And then with Josh, who's not here, Josh Martin, Dr. Martin in the department, he gave us some black ghost knife fish that he uses in the neuroscience lab. Maybe some of you, I don't know if there's any neuroscientists in here, but he let me borrow them. And they made music. They made probes that extracted the sounds of the electrical signals that the ghost fish were putting in the tank, and they used that to compose a musical piece in real time with all these other circuits that they had created. So that was really blending art and science. This high school has really let me do that because they're very open to that. This is some play that they wrote about logarithms. And I use it here at Colby too. Anyone who's taken my A&P classes, the first year I did it, the Colby Art Museum was under construction. And so I took my class down to Bowdoin, found this beautiful, it's like an anatomical scavenger hunt that I do with them. You guys remember that. You had to do that. This was the tablet there, and I put this picture up because it's so fascinating how art and science can come together. You can see right here, there's a vein that, if you look on every Assyrian tablet, relief tablet, that vein is there. That's the saphenous vein. That's remarkably anatomically correct, and there is some significance to that, which I did not divine at the time. I didn't understand the significance of it. I'm not even sure if I do still. Why they were so obsessed with it. But in my research, there's no mention of the saphenous vein going back to the age of these tablets. But if you go into the Middle Ages, Christian Assyrians, they mention the saphenous vein as cutting the vein to relieve sciatica and bleeding through the saphenous vein as a way to relieve migraines. There's some kind of mythology or ontology around the saphenous vein and its significance for the Assyrians that I think is still occult, but shows up in the art there. And so that's one of the things I like with that activity, is looking at the interplay between science and art. Yeah, you guys recognize some of these from the scavenger hunt. This is the gracilis muscle. Greg Louganis, look at that guy. Yeah, he's amazing, the anatomy on him. Okay, and I try to encourage it in my students. This is Amanda. Was Amanda in your class? No. I had this remarkable philosophy student that really got super into drawing. This was in one of the jam plans I taught. Yeah, photos, more stuff. So this is, I started taking Amanda's class. And we're so fortunate to have her. I'm going to preach for her for a minute, because I took this class with Scott, her predecessor, who was also lovely. He was relief. This is a picture of a guy. I was helping Denise on a science excursion in Ethiopia in the field, and this guy was a priest that we met out there who walked 10 miles back to his house, boiled up a basket of potatoes, and then walked back to where we were. Spent the entire day walking with potatoes in this basket on his head to feed us all after we came out of the field. Such a lovely man. I couldn't help but make him a piece. Scott's studio, though, was actually pretty chemical. It was a pretty intense chemical experience. And Amanda has gone green. Seriously, if you get a chance to take a printmaking class, you should. They're amazing. He's in one right now. This is a class. This is a print, the first intaglio print that I ever made. I did it this fall with Amanda. And this is a replica of anthracosis of the lung, black lung disease. So I'm making a series of prints right now that are sort of a response to, I'm not shy, the administration and just like the gross disregard for health and well-being that I feel is happening right now and putting people's lives in danger. So this is black lung disease as an intaglio print. So if you were to look through a microscope, here's the one I'm working on right now. This one is a print of a hydatid. It's the plate that will be a print of a hydatid mole, which is going off of women's health issues. But that's where I'm at, and there I am. Okay. Do you want me to answer questions now, or do you want me to let her up there? Because I've talked a lot. Okay. All right. Well, just a few. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone? It's mostly my class. Yeah. You ready? Yeah, once you run.